Hey, Larkin Rose here, and this shall be the penultimate episode of my slave theories. I just wanted to use that word. It means second to last for anybody who hasn't heard that rather obscure word. First of all, I'm going to do under this one what I should have done under all of them, which is include a link to the narrative life of Frederick Douglass, which is his autobiography. So that's easier for people to find. So the link for that's going to be below. Now, this video is going to be for grown-ups, and there's two reasons it may trigger various people. One is that I'm going to say a nasty word because I'm going to be reading what Frederick Douglass quotes one of his owners/masters as saying, which, as you can probably imagine, isn't very nice. That's actually a thing that comes up in the Jones Plantation that I'm waiting to see if somebody gets offended that we have a movie with the N-word in it. Like, it's about slavery. They weren't nice. They thought they owned people. So, anyway. So that's going to come up, but that's sort of the minor thing. So it'll trigger some people. Whatever. Grow up. But the real problem is going to be in my analysis of the parts I'm about to read, because some people are going to kind of take it personally and be a little bit horrified. But that's okay. I'm a grown-up, you're a grown-up, you can handle it, think about it, see if it matches reality. And if it matches reality and you get upset with me for putting that reality in front of you, I don't care. And if you think it doesn't match reality, by all means, tell me why. But here we go. So I read before from him describing how one of his master's wife, was at first this really nice, kind lady. She was like humane and gentle and caring to everybody. And so I'm not reading what I read before. He gets into that more. But this ties into a very important point. This video is about slave mentality and how they were trained to be slaves. It wasn't just you take some random person and you violently dominate them and make them work by threat of violence. It had way more to do with mind control and not just thought control, but the limitations on thought. So anyway, I'm going to jump right into it because there's a lot to cover in this one. So these are the words of Frederick Douglass describing when he was a slave. My mistress, and he's talking about the nice one at this point. Well, she started nice. My mistress, who would kindly commence to instruct me, he means teaching him to read, had, in compliance with the advice and direction of her husband, not only ceased to instruct, because he found out about it, but had set her face against my being instructed by anyone else. It is due, however, to my mistress to say of her that she did not adopt this course of treatment immediately. She at first lacked the depravity indispensable to shutting me up in mental darkness. So she was a decent human being, and why would a decent human being go out of their way to stop somebody else from learning and thinking and exploring reality? Because you have to be an evil piece of crap to do that to another human being. Like, not only do you have to be an evil piece of crap to physically restrict someone and force them to work for you, you have to be an evil piece of crap to try to train someone's brain to be subservient to your own. Back to him talking about the mistress who was nice to begin with. In entering upon the duties of a slaveholder, she did not seem to perceive that for her to treat me as a human being was not only wrong, but dangerously so. Somebody who claims the right to rule you will not and cannot treat you like a self-owning human being, like an equal. And this mistress figured that out, and it turned into her monster. She now commenced to practice her husband's precepts, because he said, "You're not allowed to teach him." She finally became even more violent in her opposition than her husband himself. She was not satisfied with simply doing as well as he had commanded. She seemed anxious to do better at squelching his thought. Nothing seemed to make her more angry than to see me with a newspaper. She seemed to think that here lay the danger. She was an apt woman, and a little experience soon demonstrated to her satisfaction that education and slavery were incompatible with each other. That may be the most profound line in all the profound stuff he wrote. You cannot have an enlightened and informed mind and have it be subservient to somebody else. The two don't match. To allow someone to think and learn and read is going to eventually lead to them being free in their own mind, which is going to lead to them being free in their body. So, to use his own words, now this is Frederick Douglass quoting his master. Like I said, his master thinks he owns people, so this isn't going to be nice. To use his own words further, he said, if you give a nigger an inch, he will take an L. An L is an old unit of measurement that nobody uses anymore. It was like a little bit more than a yard. Again, so these are his master's words. A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as he is told to do. Learning would spoil the best nigger in the world. Now, said he, meaning Frederick's master, if you teach that nigger, and in this case he was talking about Frederick, how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. What a frickin' confession. You can't let them think. They won't act like property if we let them think. Sorry, that was my words. Now back to this asshole's words. Quote, he would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. As to himself, this is the most arrogant, obnoxious part. As to himself, says this master, it could do him no good but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy. So yeah, this is for the slave's sake. You can't let them think. That'll only bring her, evil piece of crap. So, you can see the mentality. It was nice enough for him to say it out loud, being the evil piece of crap that he was, thinking he could own other people, and openly understanding if you let them think and learn and read and ponder stuff, they will be unmanageable. Yeah, no kidding. Well, guess what? That is true in the general context too, not just in the context of slavery. I am now going to jump to a different thing. This is a quote from somebody else, having nothing to do, well, having a lot to do. Having nothing to do with Frederick Douglass's specific story. I'll put it that way. Check out these words. Quote, I'm going to tell you who said them afterwards. So this isn't Frederick Douglass, this is somebody else. Education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Imagine somebody saying that out loud in public, promoting this. He wasn't saying you better watch out for this. This was somebody promoting it. Quote, here's a continuation of the quote. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. End quote. Could there be a more perfect expression of evil? The attempt to reduce other people to machines and property who can't think for themselves. He's openly describing we're going to indoctrinate them until they're just obedient subjects of the people who taught them and the governments. This was this guy, I'll say his name, Johann Gottlieb Fitch, I believe is the pronunciation, who advocated what was known as the Prussian model of education. Now, how closely does that match what Frederick's master just described? Pretty much identically. You can't have them thinking, you can't have them reading stuff and considering different ideas, because then they might have free will. They might think for themselves. They might do something other than what we, the masters, want them to do. Guess what? Two things I got to say about Johann Gottlieb Fitch, one of the main founders of the Prussian indoctrination system. First of all, he said all these before Frederick Douglass was born. This is not a new idea. Second of all, these great ideas, the Prussian model, were brought to the U.S. by a guy named Horace Mann, who's known as the father of American education, who also said, quote, "The state is the father of children." And he recommended we need to get them away from their parents so that we teach them how to think. And he advocated this exact system, the Prussian indoctrination system. Here's the part that people aren't going to like hearing. The American system of schooling, the entire thing, was openly based on the Prussian indoctrination system. It was based on a system that its creator described as being designed at destroying free will so that the pupils are thus incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their masters want them to think and act. That is the foundation of American education. And that quote was before Frederick Douglass was even born. So yes, mental enslavement is absolutely essential for physical enslavement. And politicians know that just as much as slave masters did. And they did know that before there even was slavery in this country, before there even was this country. This is not something new. This is the game that has been played forever, which, by the way, gets mentioned in the Jones Plantation. Here is Frederick Douglass describing something else a different master of his said. Because they were so open about, because they viewed these people as property, they could just openly say, yeah, here's how you have to manage them and control them. And because they didn't have to do it secretly like they do it now with the same mentality. They just said right out in the open. So he's talking about how this different master of his, quote, exhorted me to content myself and be obedient. He told me if I would be happy, I must lay out no plans for the future. He said if I behaved myself properly, he would take care of me. Indeed, he advised me to complete thoughtlessness of the future and taught me to depend solely upon him for happiness. He seemed to see fully the pressing necessity of setting aside my intellectual nature in order to contentment in slavery. We can't have you thinking of the future or being self-sufficient. No, you need us giving you all those things, providing you all these free things, because then you're trapped. Then you don't even know how to take care of yourself. Then you're scared of the idea of being free. Sound familiar? Because it isn't just slavery we're talking about anymore. Here's another thing that Frederick Douglass described. The days between Christmas and New Year's Day, I'm doing excerpts here, so this isn't the entire thing. We meaning him and his fellow slaves, regarded it as our own by the grace of our masters, and we therefore used or abused it nearly as we pleased. Yay, they're free, temporarily, kinda. By far the larger part engaged in such sports and merriment as playing ball, wrestling, running foot races, fiddling, dancing, and drinking whiskey. And this latter mode of spending the time, as in getting drunk, was by far the most agreeable to the feelings of our masters. Why would the masters want them getting drunk? Back to Frederick Douglass's words. From what I know of the effect of these holidays upon the slave, I believe them to be among the most effective means in the hands of the slaveholder in keeping down the spirit of insurrection. Were the slaveholders at once to abandon this practice, I have not the slightest doubt it would lead to an immediate insurrection among the slaves. All right, I'm going to take a slight detour. When I talk about the fact that these ideas and these means of mental control have been around forever, I'm now going to jump to a quote from somebody who died over 2,000 years ago, describing the same damn thing. Now, you may have heard the quote about bread and circuses, with the original thing being, I think there was some poet who initiated it 2,000 some years ago, who said, as long as you entertain the people with bread and circuses, you can do whatever they want and they'll be too dumb to revolt. Here is Cicero. Yeah, that's Cicero from over 2,000 years ago. Quote, of course, this was translated. He didn't speak English, but here it is translated from Cicero over 2,000 years ago. Quote, the evil was not in bread and circuses per se, but in the willingness of the people to sell their rights as free men for full bellies and the excitement of the games, which would serve to distract them from the other human hungers which bread and circuses can never appease. Meaning the hunger for freedom. This is not new. This is not accidental. Are you saying it's a conspiracy? Not only is it a conspiracy, but they admitted it out loud. Go read up. You can go to Wikipedia or anywhere else. If you really want an in-depth version, read the works of John Taylor Gatto. The Prussian indoctrination system, this was the intent of it. They said so. The people making it publicly and openly said so. It's not, ooh, somebody heard them secretly saying this behind closed doors. They loudly proclaim this to the government. This is why we should have these indoctrination centers and what the goal should be, to break their will and make them just obedient puppets for us, specifically so that when we tell them to go over there and kill people they don't know, they'll do it. One of the main stated goals of the Prussian model of education, i.e. indoctrination, was to make people into mindless soldiers who would go kill or be killed for no good reason at the command of their political masters. That's what they said it was for. And another one is make good factory workers. They don't think too much. They don't have a free will, but they will be handy, subservient, basically one step above slaves, but they need to not be able to think. So we're going to create an entire system. And then Horace Mann brought it to the U.S. and admitted that's what it was. It wasn't hidden. It's not like, oh, there's secretly ties. You can look it up anywhere. This is a conspiracy that isn't secret. It's just most people never hear about it. Anyway, back to the words of Frederick Douglass talking about the holidays and the Christmas and New Year's where they're expected to have their games and get drunk. It gets even grosser. Here we go. Quote, these holidays serve as conductors or safety valves to carry off the rebellious spirit of enslaved humanity. The slaveholders like to have their slaves spend those days just in such a manner as to make them as glad of their ending as of their beginning. Oh, I'm hungover from the weekend. All right, back to work. Their object seems to be to disgust their slaves with freedom by plunging them into the lowest depths of dissipation. Thus, when the slave asks for virtuous freedom, the cunning slaveholder, knowing his ignorance, cheats him with a dose of vicious dissipation artfully labeled with the name of liberty. You're all free. And again, a lot of this ties into what's shown in the Jones Plantation. The most of us, he's talking about his fellow slaves, used to drink it down, and the result was just what might be supposed. Many of us were led to think that there was little to choose between liberty and slavery. We felt, and very properly too, that we had almost as well be slaves to man as to rum. So when the holidays ended, we staggered up from the filth of our wallowing, took a long breath, and marched to the field, feeling, upon the whole, rather glad to go from what our master had deceived us into a belief was freedom back to the arms of slavery. See how horrible freedom is? See what you would do with your lives if not for your benevolent masters. So now you can see how much slavery was about the mental enslavement and the training and the indoctrination. And it was very deliberate, to the point where the masters could just describe what they were doing and it would still work. Which, by the way, the masters do describe what they do. They usually do it a little more quietly, but they still do it and it still works. So Frederick Douglass went on at great length in his autobiography talking about his efforts to learn to read because after his mistress turned into an evil nightmare, because we must uphold slavery, he found ways to do it. He found some young white kids who helped him to learn to read, and he would like sneak off any chance he get. How dare he be inquisitive and uppity? And so he found a way to learn. And then he turned around and illegally taught a bunch of his fellow slaves to read. And it was scary for them because they were in danger of being whipped if they got caught just learning to read. But here's what he said about the stuff he read along the way, because it included like abolitionist stuff. And this is, well, tell me what this sounds like to you. Tell me if this rings a bell. When he says they, this is Frederick Douglass talking about the things he was able to find and read. They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for want of utterance. I've heard he was way more eloquent than most Americans are today, including myself most of the time. I've heard almost the exact same thing when people come across stuff describing voluntarism, and they're like, yeah, that. I never quite had the words for it, but in my soul I knew this was bogus. This is basically Frederick Douglass saying that. He's reading people saying slavery is bad and an atrocity and an affront to humanity and all that. And he's like, yeah. And he talks about like ideas that had flashed through his mind but died away for want of utterance. Because if you're not hearing somebody say it and you don't hear it put into words, it can just feel like, oh, I don't know, that's just a feeling I had. Quote, this is going back to Frederick Douglass's words, "The moral which I gained from the dialogue was the power of truth over the conscience of even a slaveholder." Because one of the things he read was I think it was fictional, but a back and forth between a slave and his master having a moral argument about it. And I think it ends with the master setting him free because he realizes it's evil. So Frederick Douglass says, "What I got from Sheridan," who's the author of the thing he's reading, "was a bold denunciation of slavery and a powerful vindication of human rights. The reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts and to meet the arguments brought forward to sustain slavery." Again, I can't count how many people I've heard that once they're experienced to the description of anarchism and voluntarism, they're like, yeah, that, like I always instinctively knew it, but I didn't hear it put into words and have it like laid out as a coherent philosophy. And when you do, then it's obvious. And now I have the ammunition to explain it and argue it to other people. He went through the exact same thing as a slave. Like with the concept of, yeah, nobody should own me except me, which to us may seem like, wow, how can it possibly have taken you effort to figure that out? But it would have taken you effort, and it would have taken me effort too, if we were surrounded by the idea that, oh yeah, that's legitimate, slavery is legitimate, and you have to obey the law, and you have to serve your master. But Frederick also said, regarding the things he read, "While they relieved me of one difficulty, they brought on another even more painful than the one of which I was relieved. The more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. I could regard them in no other light than a band of successful robbers." What does that sound like? Everybody who realizes the inherent lie in authoritarianism and in statism has to come to the conclusion that, so they're just thugs and thieves. They're not representatives. They're not agents of the law. They're not public servants. All of that is BS. They're just thieves. And here's somebody who grew up as a slave going through the same process of realizing, wow, they're just thieves. They're just owning me like I'm property, which is 100% immoral and illegitimate. That's how much effort it takes the average person to break out of all the assumption they've been surrounded with and realize this is not okay. Even in something as overtly evil as slavery, where somebody's treating somebody else like property. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead. This is outside of his autobiography. But here's something, I've mentioned this before from Frederick Douglass. It's one of the many reasons that I admire him and think he was a freaking genius. Because, and this was right before the end of slavery. I don't even think it had ended when he wrote a thing called "What Shall Be Done with the Negro." I think that was the title of the whole page, the whole paper he did. So here are his words, and talk about brilliance. Anyway, here are his words. Quote, everybody has asked the question, what shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us. If the apples will not remain on their tree of their own strength, if they are worm-eaten at the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for tying or fastening them on the tree in any way except by nature's plan, and if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is, give him a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone. This was somebody who had just been treated as property for much of his life. How tempting would it have been if some politician saying, well, maybe we need programs to help them out, and he's saying, no, don't help us out. Just stay the hell out of the way. Stop harassing us and attacking us and lynching us and doing all this evil crap. Just stay the hell out of the way. Let us work. Let us take care of ourselves. Don't help us. Piss off. We know who you are. Your help is not helpful. Of course, he said it way more eloquently than I just did. But here he goes. Here's the last part I'm going to read from him. Quote, if men were born in need of crutches instead of having legs, the fact would be otherwise. In other words, if we were born helpless and like in need of other people taking care of us, okay, that would be different. Quote, back to his words, we should then be in need of help and would require outside aid. But according to the wiser and better arrangement of nature, our duty is done better by not hindering than by helping our fellow men. Or in other words, the best way to help them is just to let them help themselves. Give him wages for his work and let hunger pinch him if he doesn't work. That is somebody who had just been a slave, realizing that the offer of help was not going to be help. It was not going to be intended for that, and it wouldn't accomplish that. Now, here's where I have to offend some people. What the slave masters did pretty much sums up the Democratic Party platform. Oh, you can't take care of yourself, you poor thing. You've been subjected to all this nasty stuff. And they're not talking to people who were slaves 7 years ago. They're talking to people, some of whom were descendants from slaves 100 and some years ago. But what does the Democratic Party say? You can't possibly get ahead. You need government housing. You need government welfare. You need free health care. You need free education. You need universal basic income. Like the master said, don't look to the future. Don't plan for yourself. Just obey, do as you're told, and we'll take care of you. Which, by the way, there's a line in the Jones Plantation which says almost exactly that. And to me, one of the biggest abominations is there's now a bunch of things named after Frederick Douglass. That's not the abomination. I'm all in favor of that. But they include schools that are still teaching the Prussian indoctrination system. You basically named a bunch of enslavement camps after a person whose brilliance and then physical bravery led him to escape slavery. And now you're teaching the same crap that his masters used to try to keep him subservient and manageable and productive for the master, instead of a free-thinking human being with free will that can guide his own course and take care of himself and choose his own life. And to me, that's just freaking despicable. It's just horrible. The battle for slavery is not nearly over. Chattel slavery ended. The mentality didn't. The evil psychos who want to live off of the production of other people, they didn't go away. They just had to update their means of control and enslavement. And by the way, that's exactly what the Jones Plantation is about. That's the entire plot. So Mr. Jones is doing things the old way, and Mr. Smith shows up. No, you have to be more sophisticated in how you trick and control and manipulate these people to serve you better while imagining themselves to be free. And I know that pointing that out is not going to make everybody happy, and I totally don't care, because the point of the propaganda, the point of the Prussian system, the point of the current political system, right and left, is to tell you you can't be free. It would be chaos if you were free. And you need them taking care of you. You need them taking care of your retirement. You need them taking care of your health. You need them taking care of your education. If you fall on hard times, you need them taking care of your housing and your income and everything under the sun. And if you'll just let them control everything, they promise to take care of you. And you don't have to worry about like going broke or finding a job. Just leave it up to them. Just do as you're told, know your place, and your masters will take care of you. Because if you start to think for yourself, you may become unmanageable. And then you may find yourself in the inconvenient position that Frederick Douglass found himself in, which was understanding what freedom really means and wanting it. And we can't have that now, can we? If we are the ruling class. So there will only be one more episode in my Slave Think series. For the stuff I just talked about, if you found any of it intriguing, it's like, whoa, I didn't know they said that stuff, and we're openly talking about that. I highly, and I don't care if you're white or black, the enslavement methods work the same. Like the Democratic Party pushes hard to try to keep the loyalty of subjects who happen to be black. They don't give a crap about racial anything. They don't give a crap about you or anybody around you. They're just trying to keep you subservient and loyal so that you keep giving them political power. And the Republicans do the same damn thing. They just have slightly different sales pitch and a slightly different target audience half the time. The game is still the same for both of them. It's to keep you scared and feeling helpless and to scare you into giving them power over you, whether it's scared of, oh no, what if I get poor or sick or I'm old and I can't take care of myself? Don't worry, we'll take care of you. And then for the Republicans, it's we're going to get invaded or scary criminals are going to yada yada, so put us into power. It's the same game with a slightly different slant on it. But if you want to understand way better a lot of the things I'm talking about, read about 20 or 30 books from Walter Williams or Thomas Sowell. Now, as it happens, like I don't give a crap what color somebody's skin is. Both of them are black economists. Walter Williams has passed on. I had the privilege of shaking his hand before he did many years ago because he was a huge inspiration to me. Thomas Sowell is still with us and has written about 8 billion books. Walter Williams' book, I think it's called The State Against Blacks, is a good one. If you still think that like the Democratic Party, or either party for that matter, gives a crap about you and is actually trying to help you out, I highly suggest reading from these two gentlemen, and they've written a massive amount of stuff each. I mean, Thomas Sowell has written more books than I could lift, and he is ridiculously well educated on history and politics and philosophy and everything else. But to really see the game that is being played and really understand it, because yes, not only is it a conspiracy, but they did it right out in the open and they said so. And the only other one I would add is John Taylor Gatto, who was New York City and New York State Teacher of the Year. And at his retirement, he gave a speech just bashing the entire education system of the U.S. and describing what it really is and what it really accomplishes. And he gets into great detail of the Prussian indoctrination system and what it was for and all that. So I realize this can be a rude awakening, and especially if people are like, I just want to go about my life and send my kids to school so they can learn to read and write and do this and, obey the law and pay the taxes or whatever it is that you want your life to be about. I completely sympathize with the mentality of I don't want to have to worry about this crap or know about this crap. Whether you're talking about slavery or the modern version of the same thought control. Trouble is, if you don't understand how the trick works, you're going to keep falling for it. And in doing so, regardless of your good intentions and how much you just want to be left alone and live your life, you're going to be empowering the worst people in the world. Just like the slaves were tricked into empowering the worst people in the world by way of mental control and physical control. And so I highly recommend that people read up on some of that stuff if this tickled your fancy in any way. And there will be one more episode in my Slave Think, which is a fun story about how Frederick Douglass finally, all the way mentally and physically, broke free of slavery. And like I've said a million times, to me, the amazingly impressive thing was his mental escape. I mean, the physical escape sounded like harrowing and terrifying and, an amazing accomplishment in and of itself. But the mental escape, to have a brain break free of chains that were wrapped around it from the day it was born, that's really damn impressive to me. And I can't for a moment assume that I would have been able to do the same in his situation. Here I am in my cushy, relatively easy life where we can talk about these things and, nobody whips me for going out and saying the government is bogus and evil. But they did cage me for a year. But literally, life in prison was way easier than life as a slave. So at least where I was, which is minimum security. So yeah, I hope you'll read up on that, and there will be one more in this episode. Also below, I will put the link for the Jones Plantation, because I think somebody who's just read the works of Frederick Douglass and then watches the Jones Plantation, you're going to recognize a lot in there that most people never think about when they think about slavery. Most people have a very superficial, incomplete view of slavery, that it was just, oh, go work or we'll whip you. That's not all it was. That's not even most of what it was. The mental breaking down and destruction of the human soul was way more important, and was actually, if you ask me, a way greater evil. And it's what's described in the Prussian system too. It is taking away somebody's humanity to reduce them to just a piece of cattle or a machine to be used by an owner. And the reason I do what I do is because, to me, that is the ultimate sin, to try to deprive another human being of their free will and their conscience and their self-ownership. So there'll be one more episode, and it'll probably come out tomorrow. I know this is a dark topic, but I really think people need to understand what happened back then in order to understand what's happening right now. And that's what the Jones Plantation is all about. And they need to know that in order to change it and stop it.